Washington, D.C. never truly sleeps, but there are mornings when the air feels heavier, when silence isn't calm, but a warning. That Monday was one of them. The blinds in the West Wing remained shut, yet the inboxes were already aflame. Inside the Oval Office, something had arrived. Something that wasn't supposed to come back like this. A binder. Not just any binder, but the kind that demanded a signature at every hand it passed through, its weight more than paper, its presence a quiet detonation. Pam Bondi placed it on the Resolute desk herself. Still sealed, still warm from the ride over. No escort, no preamble, no pleasantries. Just the kind of delivery that made you wonder whether you were about to open a scandal or a war. She didn't sit. She didn't clear her throat. She looked the president in the eye, her voice steady, deliberate. I requested a full review of the Epstein files from our New York field office. They returned this. Trump raised an eyebrow, his fingers already moving to the seal. He opened it. Page 1, black. Page 2, blank. Page 3 had a subject header, nothing beneath. The next page looked like static, as if someone had tried to erase not just the words, but the memory they carried. He flipped further. More of the same, silence in print form. This isn't redaction, he said, his voice low, controlled. This is an eraser. Pam nodded, her tone calm but loaded. Thousands of pages, scrubbed clean. No redacted content, no visible rationale. Only a destination, no trail. Trump reached the back of the binder, then froze. One page remained unmarred. He read it slowly, then louder, each word a hammer's strike. Locked by executive order, prior administration, signed Norm Eisen. He didn't shout. He didn't slam the desk. He exhaled through his nose, closed the binder, and looked out the window, as if trying to picture what else had been hidden in plain sight. Norm Eisen, the man who'd turned impeachment into theater and called it patriotism, had locked evidence with his name stamped on it. Pam spoke again, unflinching. This isn't the first time we've seen this format. USAID, international grants, black budgets, NGOs, it's the same classification code, the same procedural stamp, the same disappearing paper trail. Trump's voice dropped, a quiet growl. If I can't see what's inside this file, then who the hell is running this country? Pam stepped closer, her tablet already open. That's exactly what we need to find out. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his gaze like a blade. Start with USAID. Follow the grant approvals. Every agency, every NGO, every dime Eisen ever touched. I want it pulled apart. I want names, signatures, motives. Pam's fingers moved across her tablet, calm but relentless. Already flagged 24 instances. Same clearance patterns, same strategic silence. Trump stared at the binder one last time before speaking again. His words a vow. We don't redact truth in this country. We expose it. And if someone thinks a little ink and an old signature can keep this buried, they clearly haven't learned how deep we're willing to dig. When the president speaks, headlines follow. But when Pam Bondi acts, the ground shakes. Within 48 hours, the FBI issued a statement, cold and formal. A federal inquiry had been opened into the Epstein files, redacted documents, and recent USAID disbursements, all tied to authorizations from the prior administration. The statement didn't name names. It didn't need to. Insiders knew where the trail led, and Norm Eisen knew he had to answer it head-on. He walked into the press room like a man who'd been preparing for this moment long before the investigation began. His suit was sharp, his expression unreadable, his words carefully loaded. I've seen the headlines. I've read the insinuations. Let me say this clearly. The Department of Justice is being used as a weapon of political revenge. He let the line hang, cold and deliberate. The president isn't looking for truth. He's looking for control, and he's using the FBI like a personal cleanup crew. He paused, just long enough for the weight of his accusation to settle. Pam Bondi, the president's longtime ally, now leads that agency. Let's not pretend this is about oversight. This is orchestration. He leaned toward the mic, not in defense, but in command. This isn't an investigation. It's a scripted drama, and I'm the villain they think they can write off. Then, with theatrical precision, he lifted a red folder, unmarked but heavy with implication. I have in this file 12 cases, 12 foreign aid transfers, each legal, each approved, each delayed or blocked under this administration. He tapped the cover. You want transparency? Let's turn up the lights. And then came the line that dominated every network. If you want light, I'll bring a spotlight. No apology, no hesitation, just challenge. But behind closed doors, Capitol Hill was boiling. Bondi's investigation had begun quietly, but it hadn't stayed that way. Every subpoena, every redacted audit that resurfaced, lit up another corridor of the deep state like a hallway of broken fuses. Agencies grew nervous. NGOs lawyered up. Staffers whispered that this wasn't just about Epstein anymore. It was about who controlled Washington's paper trail. Eisen's press conference, with its 12 stalled aid packages waved on live TV like a loaded gun, changed everything. Worse, his accusation that the FBI had become a political weapon shifted the narrative. 2 Senate committee chairs, one Republican, one Democrat, called an emergency meeting, not for unity but for survival. By Friday, a letter hit the floor. We hereby call for a public hearing under oath to determine the legitimacy and legality of Executive Order 14362 and the federal sealing of classified financial records across the previous administration. It was official. The House Oversight Committee would convene. Eisen would testify. Bondi would present. And Trump? He'd be watching, not from behind a desk, but from the front row. The hearing room on Capitol Hill wasn't packed. It was pressurized. The kind of room where no one speaks until they're sure the microphones are live, where careers end not with scandal, but with silence. The clouds outside hung low, like a veil over a crime scene no one had officially declared. Inside, the temperature wasn't cold, but the room was freezing, frozen in anticipation, in calculation, in the precise distance people kept from one another. This wasn't just a hearing. It was the start of a war conducted in sentences, broadcast in real time. Trump entered with no escort, no eye contact, like a man who didn't need a welcome because he'd built the house they were standing in. He took his seat, adjusted nothing, and looked at the committee like a chess player surveying pieces he'd already seen fall in his mind. This is not a prosecution, he said, his tone even, almost quiet. It's a recovery. No one moved, but the words landed. For too long, power in this town has meant insulation, layers of lawyers, layers of silence. That ends now. We're not here to punish, we're here to retrieve. He didn't raise his voice. The calm was louder than anger. I don't want your head, he said, turning toward Eisen. I want your paper trail. There was no outburst, just a pulse in the room, like a collective breath inhaled but not exhaled. Eisen responded with the fluency of someone who'd fought battles in courtrooms, not campaigns. "That's a touching narrative, Mr. President. Truly. But this isn't a recovery mission. It's a rewrite. You're not retrieving lost truth. You're replacing it with your version." He gestured toward Bondi. "You put your political surrogate in charge of the FBI, then ask her to investigate the administration that gave her that chair. That's not justice. That's judicial cosplay with an American flag lapel." Some staffers chuckled. One senator smirked. "And let's be clear," Eisen added, now walking the line between theater and indictment. "This is the same president who once called me a legal magician who lost his wand." He turned toward the committee, arms out slightly. "Well, here I am, unarmed, unapologetic, and, unfortunately for you, unafraid." Then, with surgical timing, "The president doesn't want answers. He wants my head to bury his past." For a second, the chamber leaned his way. Pam Bondi said nothing. She didn't reach for notes, didn't confer with counsel, didn't flinch. She sat upright, her binder closed on the table like a loaded weapon yet to be drawn. The hearing had only begun, and everyone had stopped pretending it would be civil. The microphones hadn't cooled, the lights hadn't dimmed. This wasn't a pause between battles. It was a pivot from noise to precision. Bondi didn't raise her voice when she spoke, but the quiet that preceded it gave her words room to echo. "This all began with a sealed folder," she said, her tone even but loaded. "Epstein's folder." There were no objections, not because the statement was tame, but because it was unarguable. "We were handed black pages, redacted lines, executive seals, but the names buried inside didn't stay buried for long." She tapped her binder, a new tab, a new trail. "Several organizations involved in Epstein's so-called therapeutic rehabilitation programs for underage victims reappear here." She turned to face the panel. "They show up again under PL 480, Emergency Foreign Aid." Silence. "And not just in paperwork. They received millions to operate in Gaza under cultural and trauma recovery pretexts. The same names, the same tax IDs, different countries, same money pattern." Now she looked at Eisen. 90% of that aid landed in Hamas-controlled zones, including the same NGOs named in Epstein's contracts. Eisen's jaw didn't twitch. His voice was a scalpel, calm, designed to cut. "Where there are civilians, there must be aid. PL 480 was enacted for this: humanitarian corridors in high-risk zones. When there's famine, displacement, we respond. That's what this country does." He looked to the committee, not for applause, but for agreement. "If we hold aid workers accountable for the zip codes of suffering, we're not governing. We're moralizing with a drone strike." Bondi didn't blink. "Zip codes don't lie. And when the same entity profits from child recovery services in West Palm Beach, then runs trauma workshops 2 years later in Rafah using the same nonprofit shell, we're not talking about healing anymore." Eisen raised his hand slightly, palms open. "You think you found a pattern? What you found is the footprint of complexity. Aid isn't clean, neither is politics, but it's still better than doing nothing." Bondi's voice came low, steady. "We weren't doing nothing, we were redacting. If politics had a smell, it was scorched velvet, burned just enough to look elegant from afar. If accountability had a face, it was Bondi flipping open tab D of her binder under the committee's glare. Her fingers moved without hesitation, her voice calm but quickening, like someone closing in. One of the earliest Epstein-related contracts was labeled Therapeutic Art for Trauma Recovery. Noble, gentle, soft. She didn't let it linger. The same contractor, 2 years later, received a new grant, 17 million U.S. taxpayer dollars. This time, the project was titled Children's Resilience Through Puppetry. The location? Tunisia. There was no need to dramatize. The absurdity did the work. The program ran puppet videos, allegedly to foster resilience among youth exposed to extremist rhetoric. A noble idea, until you realize none of the episodes reached more than 200 views. Total. She flipped a page. That's $85,000 per view, roughly the cost of a family home in Ohio, spent on watching Elmo shout peace slogans in a dialect the kids likely didn't understand. Nervous chuckles rippled, then died. Eisen didn't blink. Art, he said smoothly, is not math. You don't measure its value in clicks. You measure it in courage. Bondi's voice came back, colder than steel. I'm not attacking art. I'm auditing fiction, funded by fact. Eisen leaned forward, his mouth curling into near contempt. Of course you are. That's what this is, isn't it? The new morality police, armed not with Bibles or flags, but spreadsheets, telling us if a project doesn't trend, it shouldn't exist. He let the words settle like sediment. What's next, Ms. Bondi? A federal algorithm to decide which paintings hang in the Smithsonian? Or do we live stream the Louvre and remove any piece with less than 1,000 likes? Bondi didn't take the bait. The Smithsonian doesn't forge invoices. This contractor did. Silence, sharp and heavy. If every scandal bleeds, this one bled in silence, through pipelines labeled humanitarian, flowing uninspected beneath decades of polished diplomacy. It started with a puppet show and a price tag. But when we followed the invoice trail, we didn't find art. We found access points. And behind those, something older than Elmo, power, hidden under virtue. Her tone deepened like a river swelling. The Epstein file was locked under executive seal, but the money trail wasn't. She clicked to a slide. Numbers, amounts, countries, vague titles like community cohesion and youth resilience. What do you call a program that costs more than it reports, where outreach centers don't exist but invoices do, where receipts match accounts tied to properties once owned by a convicted sex trafficker? She paused, not for drama but for weight. We're not chasing names, we're chasing patterns, patterns that cross continents but always trace back to the same locked drawer. The room tightened, not with noise but with the absence of objection. Eisen stepped in, clear, unyielding. You're criminalizing humanitarian corridors. You're chasing shadows through the fog of foreign aid. This isn't oversight. It's McCarthyism wrapped in a budget line. He turned to the committee. Soft diplomacy operates in gray zones. It's not pretty, but it's necessary. Shine a spotlight into every shadow, and you'll blind your own diplomats. Trump spoke softly, without mercy. You call that gray? I've seen darker transparency on a back-alley poker table. No laughter, just recognition. Eisen didn't flinch. Don't mistake sound bites for statecraft, Mr. President. One runs campaigns, the other runs the world. Trump shrugged. Then the world's overdue for a recount. Bondi didn't blink. Let's drop metaphors and stick to facts. A grant worth over $2 million for gender equity outreach listed a field office in Beirut that doesn't exist. The site photos were stock images. The financial routing overlapped with accounts linked to Epstein's Palm Beach Trust. Her voice leveled to a blade. I'm not criminalizing corridors. I'm illuminating the ones no one dared audit until now. Documents don't merely conceal. They anchor, hidden beneath redactions and seals, behind stamps marked classified by hands long gone. Their weight lies not in ink, but in the silence they enforce. Today, in the congressional hearing room, Pam Bondi tugged at that anchor chain. "Before we expand further," she said, her voice a sheathed blade, "let me remind this committee why we're here." She tapped her binder. It began with a sealed folder, Epstein's folder. The room tensed, the air condensing around each chair. In the spring of last year, the FBI's Internal Ethics Division requested to reclassify the Epstein case from archive sealed to federal re-examination, not to revisit prosecution, but to address financial irregularities discovered during cross-NGO audits. Pam Bondi revealed that a request to re-examine the Epstein case was ignored, enforced by an executive order signed solely by Norm Eisen. Eisen defended it as necessary for national security, not a cover-up, accusing the investigation of being politically motivated vengeance. Trump countered that the sealed folder hid not just Epstein's actions, but those who enabled him, calling it national paralysis. Bondi exposed Eisen's altered memo, which downgraded concerns about NGO disbursements, and presented an email from Eisen suggesting a redaction strategy to protect the institution, not victims. Eisen claimed it was a draft, but Bondi emphasized its real-world impact. Senator Hawley ordered a forensic review of Eisen's memo and a full audit of related orders. Eisen's composure cracked, his arguments faltering. Bondi concluded that the issue transcended Epstein, targeting systems that profited from his crimes. Trump declared, "You wanted light. You got it," as the room absorbed the truth's weight.